Guilty. The word hung in the courtroom air like a suspended breath. I watched my mother's shoulders slump as the judge pronounced the verdict. Martha Reeves, 65, convicted of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement from a minor's trust. 2 years in prison, plus restitution payments. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, just a strange, hollow peace. My brother Thomas stood at the back of the courtroom, his face a mask of disbelief. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away. For the first time in his 45 years, he couldn't hide behind our mother anymore. As the bailiff led my mother away, she turned to look at me one last time. Her perfectly maintained facade had cracked, revealing the desperate woman beneath the designer clothes and carefully applied makeup. "Carol," she mouthed, "please." I remained seated, my expression unchanged. After 30 years of manipulation, after stealing my inheritance and my identity, after forcing me to sacrifice my dreams for her comfort, she still expected me to rescue her. The judge's gavel struck one final time, closing this chapter of my life. I gathered my belongings, nodded to the prosecutor, and walked out of the courtroom alone. Outside, the September sun felt different on my skin. Warmer, brighter. I was 48 years old, and for the first time since my father died 3 decades ago, I was truly free. My phone buzzed with a message from Scott. "How did it go?" I smiled, typing back. "It's over. I'm coming home." Home. Not the house I'd paid for all these years where my mother and brother had lived like royalty while I worked double shifts. But my own place, with my own name on the lease. My own life, finally reclaimed. Some daughters inherit jewelry. Some inherit property. I inherited a 30-year lesson in patience, and now, finally, justice. Flashback 6 months earlier, the email notification blinked on my computer screen, illuminating the darkened office. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, but I'd stayed late as usual. 20 years as administrative supervisor at Westside Medical Center had taught me the value of quiet hours when the phone stopped ringing and the constant stream of crises temporarily ceased. "Congratulations, Carol Reeves," the email began. "We are pleased to offer you the position of administrative director at Boston Memorial Hospital." My hands trembled as I read the words again. Director. A significant promotion from my current role. A 40% salary increase. Relocation assistance. And most importantly, a chance to start over at 48 in a new city, away from the weight of obligation that had pressed down on me for decades. The position required a 6-week intensive management training program in Boston, starting in 2 weeks. I printed the letter, tucking it carefully into my purse, and allowed myself something rare, a smile of pure, unrestrained joy. As I drove home, memories washed over me like waves. My father's funeral when I was 18, his sudden heart attack leaving our family adrift. My deferred college acceptance as I took the first of many jobs to support mom and 15-year-old Thomas. The endless cycle of just until promises, just until mom feels better, just until Thomas finishes school, just until they get back on their feet. 30 years of just until. I pulled into the driveway of the suburban home I'd been paying the mortgage on since my early 20s. Mom's car was there, but the living room was dark. Strange. She was usually watching her reality shows at this hour, wine glass in hand. The kitchen light cast long shadows down the hallway. I found her sitting at the dining table, papers spread before her, reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd been a respected elementary school teacher once, before the health issues that seemed to conveniently appear whenever any talk of her returning to work arose. "You're late," she said without looking up. "Had to finish some reports." I set my purse down, the acceptance letter burning a hole in the side pocket. "But I have good news." "So do I," she interrupted, finally meeting my gaze with a tight smile. "I spoke with Dr. Wilson today about your migraines. He's concerned about the stress you're under. I scheduled you for some tests next month." I frowned. "I don't have migraines. You've been looking pale, working too much." She waved a dismissive hand. "Anyway, I've already called the hospital and explained you need medical leave." They were very understanding. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What are you talking about?" I don't need medical leave. I also canceled that Boston nonsense, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. Really, Carol? Chasing some job at your age? You have responsibilities here. The room tilted slightly. You. What? I called them and explained there was a family emergency. She sipped from a glass of red wine. Used your email to make it official. They've already selected another candidate. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint. 30 years of subservience, of putting my dreams on hold, of working myself to exhaustion to maintain her comfortable lifestyle, all crystallized in this moment of breathtaking audacity. You had no right, I whispered. I had every right, she said sharply. I'm your mother, and this family comes first. Always. Thomas's BMW pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the dining room window. He'd been between jobs for nearly 5 years now, ever since his divorce. Another of my financial responsibilities. He sauntered in, designer watch glinting on his wrist, a birthday gift I'd paid for last year. Perfect timing, sis. The BMW payment is due next week. You're still covering that, right? Something inside me is something that had been bending for 30 years of finally snapped. At the hospital the next day, she did what? Janet nearly choked on her coffee. We were sitting in the hospital cafeteria during our precious 30-minute lunch break. Janet had been head nurse on the surgical floor for 15 years, and my closest friend for even longer. Canceled my job offer. Called pretending to be me. My voice sounded strange in my ears, detached and calm despite the rage churning inside. Said I had a family emergency. That's actually illegal, isn't it? Janet's expression shifted from shock to fury. Identity theft, fraud, probably. I pushed my untouched salad around the plate. But that's not all. Look what I found. I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken of the mortgage papers Mom had renewed 6 months ago. My name isn't even on here. After everything I've paid 20 years of mortgage payments, utilities, property taxes, insurance. Janet's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images. Carol, you've been paying for a house that isn't legally yours? Remember when I had to withdraw from nursing school that first time? I laughed without humor. When Mom had that mysterious nervous collapse after Dad died? She maxed out her credit cards and needed my tuition money to avoid bankruptcy. Meanwhile, she never missed a hair appointment or her weekly lunch with the church ladies. Janet reached across the table, squeezing my hand. What are you going to do? I've already started. I pulled up my email. I have an appointment with Michael Preston this afternoon. The lawyer whose son was in the pediatric ward last month. The distinguished-looking one with the bow ties. Despite everything, I smiled slightly. That's him. He specializes in estate law. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Car payment is due tomorrow. Need your account info since the auto pay didn't go through. I deleted it without responding. You realize this isn't just about the Boston job, right? Janet's voice softened. This is about 30 years of them taking everything you have. The memory hit me with startling clarity. Standing in the grocery store at 23, calculating if I could afford both food and Mom's prescription copay while she texted me photos from her weekend spa retreat. They've been bleeding me dry for so long. Every time I try to build something for myself, they sabotage it. Ms. Reeves? A man's voice interrupted our conversation. Michael Preston stood by our table, leather briefcase in hand, bow tie impeccably knotted. I was headed to my office when I saw you. Are we still on for 3 o'clock? I nodded, surprised by his personal approach. Yes, thank you for making time. Family situations can be complex. He adjusted his glasses. I'll see you then. After he left, Janet raised an eyebrow. He certainly seems interested in your case. It's professional courtesy, I said, though something in his kind eyes had made my heart beat just a little faster. I need to get back to work. Want to help me apartment hunt this weekend? Already on it, Janet said, sliding her phone across to show me a listing. My cousin's condo. She's in Chicago for a year on assignment. Says you can move in whenever. I stared at the photos. Bright, modern spaces, No family drama embedded in the walls. Janet, what are best friends for? She stood, gathering her things. Besides, I want front row seats when your mother realizes her cash cow is leaving the barn. Flashback, father's funeral. The rain fell in sheets, drumming against the black umbrellas gathered around my father's grave. I was 18, dressed in a borrowed black dress that hung loosely on my thin frame. Thomas was 15, trying so hard not to cry, his adolescent pride battling with his grief. Mom stood between us, immaculate in designer black, accepting condolences with practiced grace. Even in mourning, Martha Reeves was conscious of appearances. The elementary school principal's wife had standards to maintain, a role to play. I watched her, feeling strangely detached. Had she cried? I couldn't remember seeing tears. Just a flurry of phone calls, funeral arrangements, a carefully curated display of widow's grief. You look just like him, a woman whispered as she hugged me. Her voice was familiar, though I couldn't place her face. You have his eyes. His spirit. Mom stiffened beside me, subtly moving to separate us. Thank you for coming, she said dismissively to the woman. Carol, help your brother to the car. Later that night, I found Mom in Dad's study, frantically going through his papers, drawers left open, documents scattered across the floor. What are you doing? I asked from the doorway. She startled, quickly composing herself. Just organizing. Your father left things in such a mess. Can I help? No. Her voice was sharp. Then, softening. No, sweetheart. This is too much for you to handle right now. I'll take care of everything. I believed her. The first of many mistakes. The next day, she announced I'd be deferring college. Just for a year, she explained. We need to regroup financially. Your father's insurance. It's complicated. 1 year became 2, became 5, became a lifetime of deferred dreams. She never returned to teaching. Thomas never held a job for more than a few months. And I became the foundation on which their comfortable lives were built. At the law office, Michael Preston's office was warm, wood-paneled, with books lining the walls and family photos displayed proudly on his desk. A father with his children at various ages. A life lived fully, not deferred. Thank you for seeing me, I said as he gestured for me to sit. My pleasure. My son talks about you, you know. Says you were the only person at that hospital who treated him like a person instead of a patient. I smiled, remembering the bright 12-year-old who'd spent 3 weeks in pediatric oncology. Alex is special. How is he doing? In remission. Pride and relief mingled in his voice. Thanks in part to the care he received at Westside. He opened a leather portfolio, becoming professionally focused. Now, about your situation. I've reviewed the documents you emailed. It's quite straightforward from a legal perspective. Meaning? Meaning your mother has no claim on you financially. You're not on the mortgage or lease, which means you have no legal obligation to pay for the house. The utilities are in your name, so you can have them transferred or terminated with proper notice. He adjusted his glasses, studying me carefully. The more concerning issue is what you mentioned about your Boston job offer. If she impersonated you, accessed your email without permission, and sabotaged a job opportunity, that constitutes several criminal offenses. My stomach tightened. I don't necessarily want to press charges. I just want to be free. I understand. His voice softened. But Carol, what you're describing isn't just unhealthy family dynamics. It's financial abuse. Possibly even fraud, if what you suspect about your father's estate is true. The words hit me hard. Abuse. Fraud. Terms I'd never applied to my own situation. What would you do? I asked quietly. He leaned back in his chair, considering. Professionally, I'd advise documenting everything, terminating financial support, and establishing clear boundaries. Personally, he hesitated. I'd start asking questions about your father's will and what exactly happened to his assets. My Aunt Helen might know. Dad's sister. Mom cut her off after he died. Michael nodded. Finding her would be a good start. Family secrets rarely stay buried forever. As I stood to leave, He handed me his card with his personal number written on the back. Call anytime. Family situations can escalate quickly once the financial dynamics change. His fingers brushed mine as I took the card, a moment of warmth in the cold reality I was facing. Thank you. One more thing, he said as I reached the door. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Walking to my car, I felt lighter somehow. The crushing weight of obligation had shifted, just slightly, making room for possibility. The confrontation. The first utility shut-off notice arrived on a Tuesday. I heard Mom shriek from my bedroom, followed by thundering footsteps up the stairs. What is this? She burst through my door, waving the paper. The power company says service will be terminated in 2 weeks. I didn't look up from my laptop where I was researching Helen's whereabouts. You'll need to put it in your name. Don't be ridiculous. Fix this. No, the silence that followed was deafening. In 30 years, I'd never directly refused her demands. What did you say? Her voice dropped dangerously. I said no. I finally met her eyes. I'm removing myself from all the utilities. You and Thomas are on the mortgage. You can handle the bills. Her face paled. We can't afford that. Maybe skip a few spa days. I turned back to my work, heart pounding despite my calm exterior. She grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. You ungrateful little. Take your hand off me, I said quietly, or I'll call the police and report you for assault. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. I'm your mother, and I'm not your ATM. The house phone started ringing, probably the water company with their shut-off notice. Mom stormed out, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the pictures on my wall. I rubbed my arm where her nails had left marks, a strange sense of power flowing through me. For the first time since Dad died, I was taking control of my own life. An hour later, Thomas's BMW pulled into the driveway. I watched through my window as 2 men in uniforms approached him. Repo men. The car payment I'd forgotten to make had finally caught up with him. No, no, no. Thomas's voice carried clearly. There must be some mistake. My sister handles the payments. I opened my window slightly to hear better. Sir, the payment is 3 weeks overdue. We have a repossession order. Just let me call her. Thomas pulled out his phone, but I'd already blocked his number. That's my car. Actually, one of the men said calmly. It's the bank's car, and they want it back. I filmed the entire scene on my phone, evidence in case Thomas tried anything later. His tantrum, kicking the tire, the repo men doing their jobs. It was both painful and satisfying to watch. Carol. Mom's voice echoed through the house. Get down here now. I stayed put, listening to their conversation drift up through the heating vent. She's lost her mind, Thomas was saying. First the utilities, now my car. I know, sweetie. She's just going through a phase. Mom's voice was soothing, the same tone she'd used to placate him since childhood. A phase? My car just got repossessed. You haven't had a job in 5 years, I muttered to myself. Mom's voice dropped lower. I need to call Helen. Aunt Helen? Why? Because Mom's voice shook. She might be our only option now. I sat up straighter. Mom never mentioned Helen. The last time I'd asked about her, I'd been grounded for a week. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Your stuff's all moved to my cousin's place. Keys are at my office whenever you're ready. Freedom was so close I could taste it. But first, I needed to know what Mom was hiding. Helen's revelation. I recognized Aunt Helen the moment she walked into the restaurant. She had Dad's eyes, my eyes, and a quiet dignity about her that reminded me painfully of him. At 67, she moved with the confidence of a woman who had made peace with her past. You look just like your father, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. That always drove Martha crazy. Mom hates when people say that. Your mother hates anything that reminds her she's not in control, Helen replied, setting a thick manila envelope on the table between us. Including me. Especially now that you know about the trust fund. What trust fund? The words came out sharper than I intended. Helen's expression softened. Oh, Carol, you really don't know, do you? I was the executor of your father's will. My coffee went cold as she laid out document after document. Bank statements, legal papers, letters. The story they told made my head spin and my heart ache. Your father left everything to you, Helen explained. The house, his savings, his shares in the hospital where he was administrator. Nearly $500,000 plus the property and shares, all held in trust until you turned 25. My hands shook as I picked up a bank statement from 1995. Then how Martha forged my signature and emptied everything within months of Robert's death. Helen's voice hardened. She knew the right people, paid them well with your money. She pushed forward a yellowed envelope. This was from your father to you. She kept it hidden all these years. The paper felt fragile in my hands. Dad's handwriting was exactly as I remembered from the notes he'd leave in my lunchbox, the birthday cards he'd write with such care. My dearest Carol, I read aloud, throat tight. If you're reading this, I didn't make it, but I made sure you'll be taken care of. The house is yours. My shares in the hospital are yours. Your future is secure. Don't let anyone take that from you. Follow your dreams, sweetheart. You were born to soar. Love always, Dad. Tears blurred my vision. All those years of sacrifice, of putting my dreams on hold, of working myself to exhaustion, they'd been unnecessary. Dad had provided for me, but Mom had stolen it all. She took everything, Helen said softly. The house was sold and rebought in her name. The business shares cashed out. The trust fund drained. For what? My voice cracked. Designer clothes. Vacations. Status. Martha's always been obsessed with appearances, with being seen as successful and affluent. She was a small town girl who married the hospital administrator. It gave her the social standing she craved. I thought of Mom's carefully maintained image in our community. The charity committees. The church functions. The manicured exterior hiding the manipulative, selfish woman beneath. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked, not accusingly, just needing to understand. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She threatened to hurt you if I did. Said she'd make sure you never knew your father's family, that she'd poison you against me. I was grieving my brother, not thinking clearly. By the time I realized what she'd done, years had passed. She reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm so sorry, Carol. I should have found another way. It's not your fault. I touched the letter again. But we can make this right. The statute of limitations on fraud hasn't expired. She smiled grimly. And I've kept copies of everything. The original will, the forged documents, the transfer records. Even recordings of her threatening the bank manager who questioned the withdrawals. My phone buzzed. Mom calling from a new number. I declined it. She's desperate, I said. The utilities are being shut off. Eviction is in process. Helen hesitated. There's something else you should know. About your real last name. What do you mean? The name on your birth certificate isn't Reeves. It's Walsh, Martha's maiden name. She changed it after Robert died, said it would be easier if you matched her name. Another piece of your identity she stole. I sat back, absorbing this final betrayal. My entire life had been built on lies. What would you do? I asked her quietly. She gathered the documents, sliding them across to me. I'd reclaim everything she took from you. Your name, your inheritance, your right to live your own life. She squeezed my hand. But legally, always legally. The final confrontation. The eviction notice appeared on the front door like a declaration of war. I heard Thomas rip it down, followed by Mom's scream that rattled the windows. Carol. I stepped out of my room, laptop tucked under my arm. Yes? Mom thrust the crumpled notice in my face. What is this? Looks like an eviction notice. Don't you dare play games with me. Her voice shook with rage. Fix this now. I can't. I kept my voice level. I'm not on the mortgage, remember? You and Thomas signed it. You're responsible for the payments. Thomas charged up the stairs, face red. You evil little. Careful, I warned. Assault charges won't look good on your non-existent resume. We're family. Mom's carefully applied makeup was running now, her control slipping. You can't do this to family. Family? I laughed without humor. Was it family when you stole my trust fund? The color drained from her face. What? Oh, did you think Aunt Helen wouldn't tell me about the money Dad left for my education? The house he left in trust for me? The hospital shares that should have been mine? Thomas looked confused. What trust fund? The one Mom emptied when I was 18. I turned to her. Want to tell him, or should I? You don't understand, she whispered. We needed that money. For your spa days? His BMW? I opened my laptop, showing them my bank statements. Look at these transfers. Thousands every month for 30 years, while I worked double shifts, canceled vacations, gave up my own dreams. You're nothing without us. Thomas shouted. Who do you think you are? I'm someone who's done being your personal bank. I started down the stairs. You have 30 days to vacate. I suggest you start packing. Mom grabbed my arm. If you do this, you'll regret it. I'll tell everyone what an ungrateful daughter you are. I pulled free. Go ahead. Tell them how you stole my inheritance. Tell them how you forced me to drop out of college. Tell them everything. I'm your mother. No. I reached the front door, a lifetime of suppressed truth finally breaking free. You're a thief who happened to give birth to your victim, and now you're facing consequences. Epilogue. Boss. The hospital corridor gleamed under bright lights as I walked toward my new office. Director Carol Reeves, the nameplate had been installed yesterday. After 6 months of legal battles, court proceedings, and finally Mom's guilty plea, I had reclaimed not just my name but my future. Michael waited by the door, bow tie slightly askew. Our relationship had evolved from professional to personal during the months of working my case. At 55, he understood the value of time, of second chances, of not wasting a single day. Ready for your first day, Director Reeves? He handed me a coffee black with 1 sugar, just how I liked it. As ready as I'll ever be. I took a deep breath before unlocking the door. The office was spacious, with large windows overlooking the Boston skyline. On the desk sat a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. What's this? I asked, turning to Michael. From Helen. She wanted you to have it before she flew back to Arizona. Inside was a framed photo of my father standing in front of Westside Medical Center, arm around a much younger Helen. With it, a note. He always said you'd run this place someday. Now you will. Tears threatened, but these were different from the ones I'd shed for 30 years. These were tears of possibility, not loss. I got a message from Thomas yesterday, I said quietly, setting the frame on my desk. He's working at a hardware store now. Actually working. And Martha? 6 months into her 2-year sentence. I hadn't visited. Didn't plan to. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, nor should they be. Michael touched my shoulder gently. Regrets? I thought about the question carefully. About the 30 years spent in service to people who saw me only as a resource to be depleted. About the career I might have had if I'd gone to college at 18 as planned. About the family I might have raised if I hadn't been too busy raising my mother and brother. But I also thought about the strength I'd found. The friends who'd supported me. The new beginning I was crafting at 48 late, perhaps, but not too late. No, I said finally. No regrets. Just lessons learned. I placed my father's letter in the desk drawer and not hidden anymore, but kept safe as inspiration. His words echoed in my mind as I surveyed my new domain. You were born to soar. And finally, at 48, I was spreading my wings. Get out of our way. Robert Williams' voice, a mix of command and barely controlled rage, echoed through the hallway of my house. I watched it all unfold on my phone screen, 30 miles away in a hotel room, as the security camera I'd installed captured the scene in high definition. Elizabeth's face contorted with disbelief, my sister Carol's mascara-stained cheeks, and the security guard standing like a human barrier between them and my front door. This was the moment my family realized I wasn't their compliant middle child anymore. Ma'am, sir, as I've explained, Mr. Morrison is the legal occupant during Ms. Williams' absence. Without her explicit authorization, you cannot enter the premises, the security officer explained with practiced patience. James, my colleague who had agreed to sublease my house during this confrontation, stood calmly in the doorway, sublease agreement in hand. I should have felt terrible watching my parents' carefully arranged plans collapse, but instead, a strange sensation washed over me, something between exhilaration and terror. Maggie has betrayed this family, my mother declared dramatically, her hand clutching her pearl necklace as though she might faint from the shock of her middle child finally saying no. After everything we've done for her. 54 years of being the family doormat had led to this moment of rebellion. How did we get here? When did I decide that my house, the sanctuary I'd saved for 5 years to afford after my husband's death, was worth more than keeping the peace? Flashback 1 week earlier. It started, as family disasters often do, with my mother's pot roast. The aroma filled my parents' colonial-style home in the suburbs of Chicago as I arrived for our monthly family dinner. I was precisely 10 minutes late, my small act of rebellion that had become part of our unspoken ritual. My sensible sedan, the same model I'd driven for years, looked painfully modest parked next to Carol's gleaming Lexus SUV, a gift from our parents after her third divorce that year. Traffic again, Margaret? My father's greeting doubled as criticism as he opened the door. No hug, just a quick once-over that always made me feel like I was being evaluated against some invisible checklist, even at 54. Downtown was busy, I replied, the lie easier than explaining that I deliberately delayed my arrival to minimize my time in this house. Inside, Carol lounged on the sofa, designer boots propped on our mother's antique coffee table, a liberty I would have been scolded for attempting. At 58, my older sister still maintained the aura of the golden child, beautiful, socially adept, and perennially in need of rescuing. Mom's been waiting to serve, she informed me without looking up from her phone. Robert dominated dinner conversation with his opinions on politics and business, occasionally allowing Elizabeth to interject with questions that were really setups for neighborhood gossip. I was midway through my sanitized update about my latest advertising campaign when my father cleared his throat, the universal Williams signal that the real agenda was about to begin. Carol has some news, he announced with the gravity of a State of the Union address. My sister looked up from her phone, which she'd been scrolling through beneath the table. Her expression shifted from boredom to practiced vulnerability with Oscar-worthy precision. Mark and I broke up, she announced. I vaguely remembered meeting this boyfriend once at a family barbecue where he'd spent the entire time talking about his investment portfolio. He's being totally unreasonable about the condo lease, saying I need to keep paying even though I'm moving out. My mother reached across the table to squeeze Carol's hand. It's just not right. She shouldn't have to deal with this stress at her age. I nodded automatically while mentally calculating how much longer I needed to stay before making my escape. The table had already been set with dessert plates, which meant at least another 40 minutes of family theater. So, my father continued, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision. We've worked it all out. Carol will move into your place while she gets back on her feet. The casual delivery of this bombshell made it all the more shocking. My wine glass froze halfway to my lips as the words registered. They weren't asking, they were informing me that my sister would be moving into my house. My house. The one I'd spent 5 years saving for after Tom's death, while raising Emma alone and building my career. The sanctuary I had created away from this very family dynamic. It makes perfect sense, my mother continued brightly, already scrolling through her calendar. Your house has that spare room you use as an office, and you're always saying how you work late at the agency anyway. Carol just needs a few months to find her own place and recover. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the physical manifestation of boundaries being bulldozed. I actually use my office, I said, measuring each word carefully. I've been taking on freelance projects that require a dedicated workspace. Carol rolled her eyes. You can work at the kitchen table. I did that all through my real estate courses. The fact that her career consisted of multiple false starts funded by her parents, with her latest real estate venture collapsing after barely a year, went tactfully unmentioned. It's just temporary, my father added with finality. Family helps family. We can help move her things next Saturday, my mother said, not looking up from her phone. Your neighborhood has street parking, right? As I watched them planning the dismantling of my personal space, the sanctuary I had created for myself, with the same enthusiasm they once showed planning Carol's wedding while forgetting my promotion to creative director, something shifted inside me. My younger brother Michael caught my eye across the table and quickly looked away, unwilling to be drawn into a conflict that didn't directly affect him. I recognized the familiar crossroads: speak up and face the collective disapproval of my family, or remain silent and surrender my boundaries once again. But this time, instead of the anxious need to please that usually accompanied these moments, I felt a strange calm clarity. I'll need to check my homeowners association rules about long-term guests, I said neutrally, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. Of course, my mother waved away my concern. But that's just formality. They can't stop you from helping your sister. I nodded again, letting them believe my compliance was assured while mentally drafting a completely different plan. The conversation shifted to the logistics of Carol's move, with no one bothering to ask if I had plans for the weekend they had commandeered or considerations they had overlooked. As I helped clear the dishes after dessert, mapping out my response in my head, I realized I had reached the point where acquiescence was no longer an option I could live with. At 54, I was finally ready to stop being the family's reliable safety net. Flashback family history. Growing up as the middle child in the Williams family meant living in the shadow of perfectionism and expectations that seemed to apply differently to each of us. My father, Robert Williams, came from a staunch Midwestern family of educators who believed in discipline and achievement above all. His own father had been a university professor who measured worth through academic accomplishments and social standing. When Dad followed in his footsteps and eventually became department chair at the same university, it wasn't just a career, it was fulfilling a legacy that had been mapped out for him since childhood. Sacrifices must be made for family, was his mantra, though the sacrifices were rarely his own. My mother Elizabeth grew up as the only daughter of socially ambitious parents who saw her primary purpose as making a good match and maintaining appearances. Her teaching career was always secondary to supporting my father's academic reputation. When she met my father at a faculty function, their shared values of family image and position made them a perfect match in their social circle's eyes. The patterns of their upbringing echoed in how they raised us. Carol, the firstborn and charismatic one, was celebrated for embodying the social grace my mother prized above all. Michael, the baby boy and presumed intellectual heir, was coddled and excused from responsibility as he found himself well into middle age. And me? I was the responsible one, the good girl, the one expected to hold everything together while requiring little in return. Being the first one to graduate with honors meant something to me, but almost nothing to my parents, who viewed my education as the bare minimum rather than the achievement it was for someone who worked through college while maintaining a scholarship. That's nice, dear, my mother had said at my graduation, before turning to fuss over Carol's outfit for the after party she'd planned without consulting me. My father had checked his watch repeatedly during the ceremony, later explaining he had an important faculty meeting he couldn't reschedule. Michael hadn't bothered to attend at all, claiming a scheduling conflict with a weekend workshop funded by my parents, naturally. The pattern continued when I married Tom right after college. They'd been cool toward him from the start. He was only an engineer from a working-class family, not the doctor or lawyer they'd envisioned for me. When Tom was diagnosed with cancer in our early 40s, my parents offered perfunctory support, but it was nothing compared to the rallying they'd done when Carol's second husband left her. After Tom died and I was left to raise Emma alone, I hoped something would shift in our family dynamic. Instead, I became poor Maggie in their eyes, someone to be pitied rather than respected for her resilience. They never saw how I'd rebuilt my life, advancing to creative director at my agency while putting Emma through college as a single mother. The pattern of my parents making decisions that affected my life without consulting me wasn't new. When Emma was a teenager, they'd volunteered my home for the extended family's Christmas gathering without asking, announcing it at Thanksgiving dinner as a fait accompli. During Emma's high school graduation, they'd invited distant relatives to stay at my house, calling me the morning of their arrival. Whenever I tried to establish boundaries, I was met with accusations of selfishness and reminded of family obligations that somehow never seemed to apply to my siblings. Family helps family, They would say, though the help always seemed to flow in certain directions while bypassing others entirely. At the house, the drive home from my parents' house had never felt so liberating. My car, a modest sanctuary of its own, became the transitional space where the good daughter persona began to dissolve, replaced by a woman finally ready to take control of her remaining years. Sitting in my driveway, I turned off the engine but didn't immediately get out. The familiar post-family dinner emotional hangover was settling in, but this time it came with a new sensation, something between righteous anger and absolute clarity. I played the dinner conversation over in my mind, hearing my parents' voices assigning my sister to my home without a single genuine question about my thoughts or feelings. The pattern was so clear now that I could almost laugh at its predictability. My needs always subordinate, my space and time treated as community resources, while my siblings were sacrosanct. Not this time, I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Inside my house, I kicked off my shoes and walked through each room, seeing it with fresh eyes. The living room with its carefully selected furniture, the kitchen where I taught Emma to bake her father's favorite cookies after he passed, the photographs chronicling our life together and her growth into the confident young woman now pursuing her graduate degree in New York. This house in Chicago's northern suburbs wasn't just walls and a roof. It represented every extra project I took on after Tom's death, every late night at the agency, every careful financial decision I'd made while rebuilding our lives. When I finally paid off the mortgage last year, I felt like I had something that was entirely mine, something tangible that represented my independence and resilience. The office they so casually suggested I dismantle contained not just my workspace, but the physical representation of the second act of my career. On the wall hung the industry award I'd won for campaigns that had revitalized struggling brands, work that had earned me respect and recognition that didn't depend on my family's approval. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, determination replacing the resignation I usually felt after these family encounters. First, I reviewed my homeowners association rules, confirming what I already suspected. Long-term guests required registration with the association and board approval for stays beyond 14 days. Rather than seeing these as obstacles, I recognized them as the framework for my response. Next, I called my friend Susan, who had witnessed the slow erosion of my boundaries over decades of friendship. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Oh hell no, Maggie. You can't let this happen again. You're 54 years old, for God's sake. If you don't stand up for yourself now, when will you?" Her indignation was validating in a way my own emotions rarely were, her outsider perspective confirming that my family's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable. "I'm not going to," I said, surprising myself with my conviction. "I just need to figure out how to handle this without causing a complete family meltdown." We talked through options, discarding the direct confrontation approach that had failed in the past. My family had mastered the art of overwhelming opposition through sheer persistence and united guilt tripping. This situation called for strategy over confrontation, action over argument. "What if you just weren't there?" Susan suggested. "What if when they show up with Carol's stuff, you're simply unavailable?" The idea took root immediately. I had vacation days accumulated and an advertising conference in Seattle the following month that I could potentially move up. My mind raced with possibilities, not just for avoiding the immediate conflict, but for establishing a precedent that would reshape my family relationships going forward. After ending the call with Susan, I researched homeowners association rules more thoroughly, taking notes on my rights and responsibilities. I contacted my association president via email, inquiring about the guest policy and security protocols, framing my questions as general interest rather than specific concern. By midnight, my initial anxiety had transformed into methodical planning. I created a document outlining each step needed to secure my space and my boundaries, schedule adjustment, communication strategy, legal considerations, and contingency plans. The final piece of the puzzle was finding someone to temporarily occupy my house during my absence, someone whose presence would make it impossible for my sister to simply move in. My colleague James had recently mentioned needing a place to stay while his condo underwent emergency repairs following water damage. He was responsible, professional, and unknown to my family, making him the perfect temporary occupant. As I finally went to bed, exhaustion mingled with a newfound sense of empowerment. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I wasn't lying awake rehearsing explanations or apologies for standing up for myself. Instead, I was planning a resolution that would force my family to recognize me as an adult with rights they could not override, regardless of their expectations or sense of entitlement. The path ahead would be uncomfortable and possibly painful, but as I drifted off to sleep, I knew with absolute certainty that the discomfort of confrontation would be far more bearable than the slow suffocation of surrendering my independence yet again. The plan in motion. The week following the family dinner unfolded with methodical precision as I implemented each phase of my plan. Monday morning began with a call to my homeowners association, where I spoke with Patricia, the association president who had welcomed me to the neighborhood 5 years ago. I'm considering having a colleague stay while I'm away for a work conference, I explained, careful to frame the situation in neutral terms. I wanted to make sure I understand all the policies about guests and temporary occupants. Patricia provided the visitor guidelines and temporary residence paperwork, explaining that any stay longer than 14 days required association notification and approval. I nodded, feigning casual interest while mentally noting how these policies contradicted my family's assumptions. And just to clarify, if someone showed up claiming to be moving in without this paperwork? I asked. Absolutely not permitted, Patricia stated firmly. Our security service would prevent entry without proper authorization, and we take that very seriously. It's for everyone's safety and property values. Armed with this confirmation, I texted my colleague James during lunch, explaining my situation in professional terms while omitting the more dysfunctional family dynamics. I need someone responsible in my house while I'm away for 2 weeks. There would be a formal temporary residence agreement to protect both of us. Would you be interested? James' response came within the hour, expressing gratitude for the timing given his ongoing condo repairs. We arranged to meet Wednesday after work to review the arrangement and complete the necessary paperwork. Tuesday evening, I received the first text from Carol. Mom says I should check with you about what furniture I should bring. I'm thinking my bedroom set would look better in your spare room than whatever you have in there. The presumptuous tone confirmed I was making the right decision. I crafted a deliberately vague response. I'm figuring out some logistics about the house situation. Let's touch base next week. This non-committal reply bought time while revealing nothing of my intentions. Throughout dinner at my parents' house, I'd felt like a spy behind enemy lines, and that sensation continued with each carefully worded text message. By Wednesday, I had completed the temporary residence agreement with James, making it official with both signatures and filing a copy with the Homeowners Association. Thursday, I scheduled my work trip to coincide with my family's planned moving day for Carol, booking a hotel in a coastal town 30 miles away. There's one more thing, I told James as I handed him the keys. My family doesn't know about this arrangement, and they may show up expecting me to be here. If they do, you're under no obligation to let them in or explain anything beyond the fact that you're the legal occupant during this period. James, having dealt with his own family complications following his divorce, nodded with understanding. I can handle that. Just the facts, no drama. Friday brought escalating texts from my mother, asking about parking and whether I could clear out some of those bookshelves to make room for Carol's essential items. I responded with brief texts about being swamped with work deadlines, intentionally creating the impression of busy acquiescence while finalizing my counter strategy. The starkest reminder of why I needed to take this stand came in a message from my father Friday night. We'll arrive around 11 a.m. Saturday. Have the driveway cleared and make space in your closet for Carol's winter clothes. The commanding tone, devoid of any question marks or consideration for my schedule, only reinforced my resolve. This wasn't a request or even a discussion, it was a directive from someone who had never doubted his authority over my life, even as I approached retirement age myself. My final preparation was setting up a small security camera in my living room, positioned to monitor the entry area, a legal precaution I never imagined needing against my own family. As I packed my overnight bag Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Carol's so excited about her fresh start at your place. This will bring you girls closer together. I left this message unanswered, recognizing it as another attempt to frame their imposition as a gift I should be grateful for. By afternoon, I was checked into my hotel room. My phone notifications set to silent except for work contacts and James. I was ready for the inevitable storm that would erupt when my family's expectations collided with the reality I had arranged. The boundaries I had established on paper were about to be tested in real life, and for once, I felt ready to hold my ground against the tidal wave of family pressure that had always previously swept me away. The confrontation present day. And so here I was, watching through my security app as my family's carefully laid plans crumbled in the hallway outside my house. The timing couldn't have been more precise. At 11:03 a.m., my security app pinged with motion detection at my door. My parents and Carol stood in the hallway, my father pounding with increasing force while my mother repeatedly rang the doorbell. Carol paced behind them, gesturing animatedly while talking on her phone, presumably trying to reach me. After several minutes of unanswered knocking, my father pulled out his phone and appeared to call the homeowners association. I imagined the conversation with the weekend security staff, explaining that no, they could not provide access to a house for individuals not on the authorized list, regardless of family relationship. The security footage continued as my family retreated temporarily, likely heading to their car to strategize. 20 minutes later, they returned with a security officer who appeared to be explaining something that caused my mother to throw her hands up in exasperation. My father's posture stiffened in the way it always did when he encountered resistance to his plans, his authoritative demeanor failing to impress the security professional who was simply doing his job. Just as they seemed ready to leave, the front door opened, revealing James in casual weekend attire, coffee mug in hand. Even without audio, I could see my family's shock in their body language, the physical recoil of surprise. James appeared perfectly calm, likely explaining his legal occupancy while my family struggled to process this unexpected development. My mother's hand flew to her chest in her signature gesture of distress, while my father leaned forward aggressively until the security officer stepped between them. Carol stood frozen, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage as the reality of the situation became clear. The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes before the security officer escorted my family back toward their car, my father's rigid back and my mother's animated gesturing suggesting heated emotions barely contained. As they disappeared from the camera's view, I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath while watching the encounter. Within moments, my phone exploded with notifications. Voicemails from my father threatened everything from calling the police to report an unauthorized occupant to coming to my workplace on Monday if I didn't respond immediately. My mother's messages escalated from confusion to accusation. How could you do this to your sister? After all we've done for you throughout your life. Carol's texts were less restrained, a stream of all caps invective questioning my character, loyalty, and basic human decency. I forwarded the most concerning messages to Susan, who had offered to monitor the situation in case legal intervention became necessary. Your family is melting down, she texted back after reviewing them, but you're completely within your rights. Stay strong. Around 1 p.m., James called to give me a first-hand account of the confrontation. Your father tried to insist they had your permission to enter, he explained. When I showed them the temporary residence agreement, he claimed it must be fraudulent. The security guy had to remind him that attempting unauthorized entry could result in police involvement. He chuckled lightly. They left when your dad realized he was creating a scene in front of your neighbors. Your mom said they would address this betrayal directly with you. I thanked him for handling the situation so professionally and asked if he felt comfortable continuing with our arrangement given the conflict. Absolutely, he assured me. Your family's drama doesn't change our agreement. Your home is secure. By early evening, the initial barrage of calls and texts had slowed, replaced by a more strategic approach. My aunt called, clearly enlisted as a mediator, her voice gentle with practiced concern. Everyone's worried about you, Margaret. This isn't like you, shutting out your family when they need you. Is this about Tom? Are you still having trouble moving on? The mention of my late husband as a weapon in their arsenal stung deeply. I let her voicemail play to completion but didn't return the call, recognizing the familiar pattern of using extended family to apply pressure when direct methods failed. My father's final message of the day came at 10:30 p.m., his voice deliberately controlled but underlined with anger. Your mother is distraught. Carol has nowhere to go. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. This childish stunt ends now. Call us in the morning to arrange access to your house. As I prepared for bed in my quiet hotel room, I felt an unexpected sense of peace despite the day's chaos. For the first time in over 5 decades, I had set a boundary and held it firm against the tidal wave of family pressure. The guilt and anxiety were still present, familiar companions after years of emotional conditioning, but alongside them was something new and fragile: pride in my own strength and the certainty that I deserved the basic respect of being consulted about my own living space. Tomorrow would bring more confrontation as my family adjusted to this new reality, but tonight I allowed myself to recognize a simple truth. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and others is to stop participating in unhealthy patterns, even especially when that disruption causes discomfort. The path to healthier relationships begins with the courage to say no when saying yes would require the sacrifice of your self-respect. The resolution. Sunday morning arrived with the strange quietness that follows upheaval, like the stillness after a thunderstorm. I checked my security feed first thing, relieved to see no unexpected visitors had attempted to return to my house overnight. My phone showed fewer messages than I expected, suggesting my family might be regrouping to develop a new strategy. The first text came from Carol at 7:15 a.m., her tone dramatically different from yesterday's rage. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I have nowhere to go. Is this because of that time I borrowed your pearl earrings for my second wedding and lost one?" I said I was sorry for that. The attempt to minimize the situation by referencing a trivial past conflict rather than acknowledging the genuine boundary violation in the present was so characteristic of our family dynamics that I almost laughed despite the tension. Those earrings had been my grandmother's, one of the few keepsakes I had from her, and Carol had never actually apologized for losing one. She'd simply accused me of overreacting. I didn't respond, recognizing the message as the first move in the familiar dance of deflection and guilt manipulation. By mid-morning, my mother had shifted from anger to bargaining, her voicemail suggesting compromises that still fundamentally disregarded my autonomy. Maybe Carol could just stay for 2 weeks while she finds another place? "We could pay you a little rent if that's what this is about." Family helps family, Margaret. The implication that my boundary was motivated by financial interest rather than basic respect for my space and independence revealed how deeply she misunderstood my position. My father's communication style evolved as well, moving from commands to calculated reason. "I understand you feel we should have discussed this more thoroughly. That's fair. Let's sit down like adults and work out a solution that helps your sister while respecting your concerns." His measured tone couldn't disguise the underlying assumption that the end result would still be Carol moving into my house, just with the veneer of my consent added to legitimize the arrangement. Around noon, I received an unexpected text from my brother Michael, who had remained conspicuously silent throughout the conflict. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. Carol's staying at their place and complaining nonstop. Not sure what happened exactly, but whatever you did to stand up to them, respect." His message was the first acknowledgement from any family member that my resistance might be justified, and it provided a small but significant counterbalance to the overwhelming pressure from the rest of the family. James updated me throughout the day, reporting that no further attempts had been made to access my property. "Your father called the homeowners association this morning," he informed me. "The weekend manager told me he demanded to speak to someone about fraudulent temporary residence documentation, but was informed all your paperwork was properly filed and legally binding." The failed attempt to override my arrangements through official channels confirmed my decision to handle this situation through formal processes rather than emotional appeals had been the right approach. By Sunday evening, extended family members began weighing in, clearly having received a carefully edited version of events. My uncle called to express his disappointment that I wouldn't help poor Carol during her time of need. My mother's sister emailed a lengthy message about the importance of sibling bonds and how I would regret this selfishness when I was older and needed family support, apparently forgetting that I was already in my 50s and had weathered my husband's death with minimal support from the very family now demanding my help. I archived these messages without responding, recognizing them as the next phase in the escalation pattern, the widening of the conflict to include allies who would apply additional pressure. Monday morning brought practical concerns as my father sent a terse message about Carol's furniture, which was apparently sitting in a rented moving truck accruing daily fees. This situation is costing us money now. What do you suggest we do with your sister's belongings? The question was the closest thing to an acknowledgement that their original plan had failed and they were being forced to consider alternatives. I didn't respond immediately, letting the reality of consequences for their presumptuous actions settle in without my intervention. By Monday afternoon, my mother had reverted to emotional appeals, sending a photo of Carol looking forlorn surrounded by boxes in my parents' living room. "This is what your stubbornness has caused," the caption read, a transparent attempt to transfer responsibility for their failed plan onto me. I muted the conversation and spent the evening researching family therapists in our area, recognizing that if any healthy relationship was to be salvaged from this situation, professional guidance would be essential. Tuesday brought the first sign of genuine recalibration as my father's tone shifted from demanding to pragmatic. "We're looking at apartment listings for Carol. Let us know when you're ready to discuss what happened." The brief message contained no apology or acknowledgement of overstepping, but the pivot to finding alternative housing for my sister represented the first tangible evidence that my boundary was being recognized, if not yet respected. That evening, I crafted a careful response, my first direct communication since the confrontation. "I'm glad you're helping Carol find her own place. I'll be back in town Friday, and I'm willing to meet and talk on Saturday afternoon." The message was intentionally neutral, offering an opportunity for discussion without apology for my actions or emotional engagement with their accusations. Wednesday and Thursday passed with minimal contact, suggesting my family was processing the situation in their own way. Carol sent one message asking if I could store just a few boxes in my basement until she found a place, which I politely declined, maintaining the boundary I had established. By Friday morning, as I checked out of my hotel, I felt ready to re-engage with my family from a position of newfound strength. The past week had been challenging but transformative, forcing all of us to confront patterns of interaction that had gone unquestioned for decades. As I drove back toward the city, I recognized that the upcoming conversation would be difficult but necessary, the first step in either rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms or accepting that some distance might be required to maintain my hard-won independence. Either way, I was approaching the situation as a full adult with legitimate rights and boundaries, not as the perpetual accommodating daughter whose needs always came last. That shift in perspective, more than any practical outcome, represented the true victory in this painful but necessary confrontation with family dynamics that should have been challenged long ago. The meeting, Saturday afternoon, arrived with golden autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the neutral territory I had selected for our family meeting, a quiet coffee shop equidistant from my house and my parents' home. I arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a corner table with good visibility of the entrance and enough privacy for our conversation. Ordering a cappuccino provided a moment to steady my nerves and review the key points I had prepared, determined to remain calm and clear regardless of how my family approached the discussion. A lifetime of family dynamics condensed into this moment as I waited. I thought about Emma, who had called from New York after I told her what happened. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she'd said, her voice warm with genuine approval. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It's about time you stood up for yourself." My mother arrived first, 5 minutes early as was her habit, her expression carefully composed but her rapid blinking betraying her nervousness. At 74, Elizabeth still maintained the impeccable appearance that had always been her armor, though the strain of recent events showed in the tightness around her eyes. She moved to hug me, hesitating when I offered a hand instead, the small gesture establishing new boundaries from the outset. My father and Carol arrived together moments later, Robert's face set in the stern expression he adopted when preparing for difficult negotiations, Carol's eyes red-rimmed from either tears or lack of sleep. An awkward silence fell as they settled into their seats, the familiar family dynamic temporarily disrupted by the unprecedented situation. My father cleared his throat, assuming his usual role as conversation director. "Well, Margaret, I think you owe us all an explanation for your behavior last weekend." The framing was predictable, positioning me as the transgressor despite their actions, and I recognized it as the opening gambit. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice deliberately even, I think we need to discuss why you all made plans for my house without consulting me first. My directness clearly surprised them, my mother's eyebrows rising as my father's mouth tightened at the corners. Carol shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly very interested in stirring her untouched coffee. We were trying to help your sister, my mother began, her voice sliding into the gentle remonstrance that had diffused countless family conflicts in the past. You have that extra room just sitting there, while Carol needed a place to stay. Family helps family. The familiar refrain hung in the air between us, a maxim I had heard countless times when sacrifices were expected of me, but rarely when I needed support. I understand Carol needed help, I acknowledged, but deciding she would move into my home without even asking me first wasn't help. It was an invasion of my space and a disregard for my autonomy. My father leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. This melodramatic terminology isn't helpful, Margaret. Invasion. Autonomy. We're talking about your sister needing temporary housing, not some philosophical debate about personal boundaries. The dismissal of my concerns as melodrama was another familiar tactic, one that had effectively silenced me in past conflicts. This time, however, I had anticipated the move and prepared my response. It is about boundaries, Dad, healthy ones. Would you have made these arrangements for Carol to move into Michael's apartment without asking him first? The question landed with visible impact, my father sitting back slightly as he considered. My mother jumped in quickly. That's different. Michael's situation is different. The vague justification highlighted the double standard I had lived with for years, making it impossible to ignore. Different how? I pressed gently. Because you respect his space and decisions in a way you don't respect mine? The flash of recognition in my father's eyes told me the question had hit home in a way I hadn't anticipated. For a brief moment, I glimpsed something I'd rarely seen in him, uncertainty. Carol finally spoke, her voice wavering between defensiveness and genuine confusion. I didn't know they hadn't talked to you about it first. They told me you were fine with the arrangement. Her revelation shifted something in the conversation, suggesting my parents had misled not just me but also my sister about the level of communication that had occurred. My mother flushed slightly, her gaze dropping to her coffee cup. We were going to discuss the details with you, she said, but we knew you'd be agreeable once you understood Carol's situation. The presumption inherent in her statement hung in the air, impossible to ignore. That's exactly the problem, I said quietly. You didn't talk to me because you assumed I'd say yes, regardless of my own needs or circumstances. You treated my home as community property rather than my personal space. My father started to respond but paused, seemingly processing my words with unexpected consideration. The momentary silence stretched until he finally spoke, his tone notably less combative. Perhaps we should have approached this differently, he conceded. Your living situation is your own business, and we overstepped. The acknowledgement, however reluctant, was more than I had honestly expected, and I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen slightly. My mother's expression remained troubled, her innate desire for family harmony clearly battling with the disruption to established patterns. We just want what's best for both our girls, she said, reaching toward me again. You've always been so independent. We sometimes forget to check if you need your space. The qualifier sometimes understated decades of boundary violations, but I recognized the statement as the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive in this initial conversation. Carol looked between our parents, then directly at me, her expression more genuine than I had seen in years. I'm sorry, Maggie. I should have called you directly instead of just assuming everything was arranged. That was really inconsiderate. Her apology, unqualified and straightforward, surprised me most of all. Thank you for saying that, I replied sincerely. I would have been happy to help you find solutions if I'd been approached respectfully. The conversation shifted then, moving from accusation to tentative problem solving. My father mentioned several apartments they had found for Carol, more affordable than she had initially wanted but within her budget with some parental assistance. My mother suggested a family gathering to help Carol move once she secured a place, carefully adding, if everyone's available, with a meaningful glance at me, a small acknowledgement of my right to choose. As the tension gradually eased, I introduced my final prepared point, the one I had been most nervous about addressing. Going forward, I need certain boundaries respected. direct communication rather than assumptions, consulting me about decisions that affect my life before they're made, and respecting my right to say no without being made to feel selfish or difficult. My father nodded slowly, the academic in him recognizing reasonable terms even if the father in him struggled with the changing dynamic. Fair enough. We'll try to be more mindful. My mother reached across the table, not to touch me, but to place her hand near mine, a gesture of connection without presumption. We love you, Margaret. Sometimes we get caught up in managing everything and forget that you're an adult with your own life now. The irony of this statement, recognizing me as an adult at 54, was not lost on me, but I chose to accept it as progress rather than pointing out the absurdity. As we prepared to leave, arrangements tentatively made for helping Carol with apartment viewings the following weekend, I felt both exhausted and cautiously optimistic. The conversation hadn't solved everything. Decades of family patterns couldn't be restructured in a single coffee shop meeting, but it had established a precedent for more respectful interaction that I was determined to maintain going forward. Carol hung back as our parents headed to their car, catching my arm gently. I really am sorry, she said, her voice lower and more sincere than the performance contrition she had often deployed in family conflicts. And I'm kind of impressed, actually. I've never seen anyone stand up to mom and dad like that. Her acknowledgement of the difficulty and significance of what I had done provided unexpected validation. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it was necessary for all of us. As I watched them drive away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, not because all problems were solved, but because I had finally found my voice in the family conversation that had excluded it for so long. Epilogue: New Beginnings. Returning to my house after James' temporary stay ended felt like coming home to a space that was truly mine in a way it hadn't been before. The physical surroundings were unchanged, every piece of furniture and decoration exactly where I had left them, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to this sanctuary I had created for myself. Standing in my living room that first evening alone, I ran my hand along the bookshelf my father had so casually suggested clearing for Carol's belongings, appreciating how each object represented choices I had made for myself rather than accommodations for others' expectations. The week following our coffee shop conversation brought subtle but significant changes in my family's communication patterns. My mother called rather than texted about family matters, her carefully worded questions actually framed as requests rather than assumptions. "We're helping Carol look at apartments on Saturday if you'd like to join us," she offered, the tentative phrasing acknowledging my right to decline without judgment. My father's communication remained more distant but noticeably more respectful, his habitual directives replaced by informational updates that required no response. Carol surprised me most, reaching out to suggest lunch, just as sisters, with an openness I hadn't experienced with her since before we were teenagers. Our meal together revealed aspects of her perspective I had never considered, including her own struggles with our parent expectations and her genuine belief that I had willingly agreed to share my house. "They always made it sound like you were happy to help, eager even," she explained, picking at her salad. "I never questioned it because it fit the story they always told about you being the responsible, accommodating one." Her words illuminated how our parents had shaped our perception of each other, casting us in complementary roles that prevented genuine connection. "I'm trying to be more independent," she admitted. "Seeing you stand your ground made me realize how much I've let them handle everything in my life, even at my age." The conversation marked the beginning of a more authentic relationship between us, one based on direct communication rather than roles assigned by our parents. The process of rebuilding family dynamics on healthier terms wasn't without setbacks. My mother occasionally slipped into old patterns, making comments about how my new attitude was making family planning more complicated. My father sometimes responded to my boundaries with cool distance, his discomfort with the changed power dynamic evident in his reluctance to engage directly. Family dinner the following month was tense at moments, the established roles we had all played for decades not easily abandoned despite conscious efforts. Yet amid these challenges, I found my own confidence growing. Each time I politely but firmly maintained a boundary, the paralyzing guilt that had previously accompanied any self-advocacy diminished slightly. When my mother called asking me to host Thanksgiving despite my earlier refusal, I was able to decline without the hours of anxious justification that would once have followed such a conversation. "That doesn't work for me this year," I stated simply, offering to bring side dishes to whoever did host but remaining firm in my decision. The brief silence before her acceptance of my answer felt like victory, small but significant. Carol found an apartment in early December, a modest one-bedroom closer to her workplace than she would have previously considered. I helped her move in, our collaboration lacking the tension that had characterized so many of our past interactions. As we arranged her furniture, she confided that she had started therapy, partly inspired by my example of setting boundaries. I need to figure out who I am outside of being this social, emotional daughter who always needs rescuing, she explained as we assembled her bookshelf. I want to be someone who can handle her own life, even if I'm starting late. Her vulnerability in that moment created a bridge between us stronger than any we had built in adulthood, founded on mutual respect rather than assigned family roles. The holiday season brought the ultimate test of our family's evolving dynamic. When we gathered at my parents' house for Christmas dinner, my mother had called ahead to ask what dish I could contribute rather than simply assigning one, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of my adult autonomy. My father greeted me with a warmth that had been absent since our confrontation, his gradual acceptance of the new family balance evident in his genuine questions about my work and plans for the new year. As we exchanged gifts and shared stories, I noticed subtle shifts in everyone's behavior. My parents consulting each other rather than making unilateral decisions, Carol gently declining my mother's unsolicited career advice, my own comfort in expressing opinions that diverged from family consensus. The evening wasn't perfect, old patterns occasionally emerging before being consciously redirected, but it represented genuine progress toward healthier family relationships. My daughter Emma joined us for dessert after spending Christmas Day with her boyfriend's family, a choice that would have sparked drama months earlier, but was now accepted with minimal fuss. Watching her interact confidently with my parents, setting her own boundaries effortlessly, I felt a surge of pride mixed with wistfulness. She had somehow learned what had taken me over 5 decades to figure out. Later, as Emma helped me carry leftovers to the car, she squeezed my hand. "You seem different, Mom." "Happier." "I am," I realized, the truth of it settling comfortably around me like a favorite sweater. "It turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks after all." "You're not old," she laughed. "You're just getting started." Driving home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past few months, from the family dinner where my parents had assigned my sister to my house to this holiday gathering where boundaries were beginning to be acknowledged, if not yet fully respected. The process of healing family relationships distorted by years of unhealthy dynamics would be ongoing, requiring continued vigilance and occasional reinforcement of boundaries. Yet the fundamental shift had occurred, not just in how my family treated me, but in how I viewed myself in relation to them. I had discovered that standing up for myself didn't have to mean cutting ties or constant conflict, but rather creating space for more authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles and unexamined expectations. As I unlocked my front door, returning to the space I had fought to protect, I felt grateful not just for these walls and their sanctuary, but for the stronger sense of self I had discovered within them. The most valuable lesson from this painful family confrontation wasn't about property rights or living arrangements, but about the fundamental truth that healthy relationships require both love and boundaries, both care and respect. By finally saying no to a boundary violation I would once have silently accepted, I had opened the possibility of saying yes to a more genuine connection with my family, one built on who we truly were rather than who we were expected to be. The house was quiet as I turned on the lights, but it didn't feel empty. Instead, it felt full of possibility, not just for the years I had left in my career before retirement, but for the relationships I was rebuilding on healthier foundations. At 54, I was finally learning that it's never too late to redraw the map of your life, to reclaim spaces both physical and emotional that should have been yours all along. That night, I slept better than I had in years, no longer haunted by the weight of expectations I had never agreed to carry. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I would face them not as the perpetual peacekeeper of the Williams family, but as Maggie, a woman who had finally learned that boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, but foundations upon which respect can build something stronger than obligation ever could.